Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you all to the second hearing of the Senate Select Committee on Women and Inequality, Strategies to Promote Opportunity. There are a number of members of the Senate, primarily the Women's Caucus, who are also members of the Select Committee. And as many of you know, this is a very busy season in the legislature. We've got multiple policy committees going on simultaneously. Many of my colleagues are chair of those committees, as Senator Jackson's chair, Judish, and others, and so some will be joining us as they can, but I'm pleased to say that the hearing will be broadcast on the Senate website. And so there'll be opportunity, and there is opportunity for members of the general public to tune in. Our office has received calls from members of the public who are keenly interested in this conversation about women and income inequality. And so I appreciate all of you for being here and participating in this very timely, critical conversation. Select committees offer us the unique opportunity to study California policy issues and problems in depth and free of the Senate's schedule of legislative deadlines, allowing us to develop longer-range solutions. The California Budget Project recently documented what the hundreds of people testified at our hearings have told us. State policy decisions have, in some instances, driven families deeper into poverty. Case in point, they concluded that women have not shared equally in the emerging recovery, and recent years' budget cuts continue to cloud the economic outlook for women and threaten their economic security. California women's median annual earnings have declined by more than $2,000 since 2006. California's poverty rate is at its highest point since the mid-1990s. And the California Women's Foundation, at our convening earlier, provided us with a chart listing female-headed households living in poverty in 2010. And just a quick perusal shows me that every Senate and Assembly district across the state of California has households living in poverty. The lowest percentage I see here is 28%. So almost fully a third of all the female-headed households in every community across the state of California are living at or below poverty. This is very, very sobering and telling data. Again, the study commissioned by the Women's Foundation concludes that 54% of those in poverty are women. Households headed by single women comprise 13% of all families, yet represent 39% of the households living in poverty. Racial disparities exacerbate poverty for women of color. The Women's Bureau fact sheet on the economic status of women of color documented that in 2011, annually, 20% of families with a Hispanic female householder, 16% of families with a black female head of household, and 6% of families with an Asian female head of household, while 12% of families with a white female head of household lived in poverty while the household leader worked full-time year-round. So that should dispel the myth around who lives in poverty, and the fact that we've got people working full-time jobs year-round are still not earning enough. They're not earning their way off of the federal poverty list. More than 2 million Californians live in what's called deep poverty, including over 500,000 children. Deep poverty means a family of 4 are living on about $16,000 a year or less. We're not alone in our concerns. Polls show inequality to be a growing public concern. A Pew Research Center survey this year found that 65% of all Americans believed inequality was growing, and a Gallup poll found similar results. So as you all know who work these halls on a regular basis, that this past Sunday we did pass a state budget. And as I said in my floor statement that night, that I would suggest that it's our actions as policymakers, our duty as those accountable for the responsible appropriation of the state's precious fiscal resources, that should be our loudest representation of our core beliefs and values, as opposed to lip service some of us give toward our concern about poverty alleviation. So I did cast my vote on this year's budget. albeit with tempered enthusiasm. But today we're here to build on what we hope will be future state budgets, future critical investments in programs that we know are important to help support women and girls in the state of California and ultimately to eradicate poverty and inequity in their life experience. Government plays a critical role and has an indispensable role to play. We should be moving to eliminate inequity based on gender and race, strengthen our social safety net, and educate and foster opportunity for all of California's children. So I look forward to hearing from our amazing speakers today and members of the public as we move to meet the charge of the Select Committee, both to define the inequities that exist for women and children, and most importantly, from my perspective as a policymaker, to develop strategies to promote successful opportunity. With that, I'll invite our first panelist to join us at the table. And I could be honored to introduce you. I had the opportunity to attend the Democratic National Convention and was spellbound by the speech I heard by Sister Simone Campbell, who spoke eloquently about her commitment, the commitment of her community to having meaningful conversations about poverty in this nation. So we jumped at the opportunity to invite her back to California, where she both lived and was an advocate here for a number of years. Sister Simone Campbell has served as Executive Director of Network since 2004. She's a religious leader, attorney, and poet with extensive experience in public policy and advocacy for systemic change. Your bio has to be updated to say author now.
Yes. New edition.
New edition. Her book, A Nun on the Bus, which chronicles her leadership in the network's movement in the Ryan budget era to educate people nationally about issues around poverty and poverty alleviation. In 2012, she was instrumental in organizing Nuns on the Bus to tour 9 states to oppose the Ryan budget, approved by the House of Representatives. In 2013, she led a new cross-country Nuns on the Bus trip focused on comprehensive immigration reform. The panels that you'll hear today have really been organized to really talk about how do we affect policy change in a meaningful way. In some instances, how do we begin to pay for it? And how do we develop appropriate messages and move the political will to have this meaningful conversation about poverty and inequality that women face across the country? With that, thank you so much for coming today. Sister Simone, we appreciate you being here.
Thank you so much, Senator. It's an honor to be here, and I'm delighted to be back in Sacramento. I really see that California has a unique opportunity right now to address the issues of poverty and to serve as, I've been calling it a petri dish, a place where you can try some things to make poverty less of a burden on our whole social reality in our nation. I wanted to start with a quote from Pope Francis, who I feel fairly affectionate towards these days. But Pope Francis in November stated that the need to resolve the structural causes of poverty cannot be delayed, not only for the pragmatic reason of its urgency for the good order of society, but because society needs to be cured of a sickness which is weakening and frustrating it, and which can only lead to new crises. And he ends that paragraph by saying, inequality is the root of social ills. And I believe that's what you're exploring is this structural causes of poverty in our society. Too often we come at it with a 1960s model that has very stylized views of what is causing poverty. But what we now know is that poverty disproportionately affects women. Some of it is the result of old policies from before related to work, women in the workforce, women taking time out for childbearing years. But it's also about the fact that women are not paid the same amount as men for doing the same work. Additionally, we know some programs that have made a difference in poverty, including things like the Earned Income Tax Credit, the Child Tax Credit, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, Women, Infants, and Children Program, and now the new Affordable Care Act is helping families avoid catastrophic bills because they can get health care. These programs have worked, and yet we have poverty continuing at too high of a rate. We also know that early childhood education and quality education for our children problem of poverty. Ever tailoring that education to the needs of the individual is a serious problem. He had never been able to get a job because he couldn't fill out an application. But he hadn't caused trouble. It was his social framework. Employers are getting a wealthy man, and he pays a living wage to all of his employees, even the lowest skilled employee. He's 35, he's sort of one of those miracle kids, 35 years old, has grown 3 businesses, an entrepreneur, sold 2 of the businesses. He was about to sell his 3rd business. And he told me that he paid a living wage. He felt like it was investing in his people. He had lower turnover rate. He had higher productivity. It mattered. But he was getting miffed because he realized his taxes were going to fund his competitors. Because his competitors weren't paying a living wage. His competitors were having their low-skilled workers go use the safety net.
Right.
And so the safety net was really a business subsidy in his point of view. And that this business subsidy was undermining his capacity to be a responsible, ethical. All should be required to pay the true costs of their business, meaning the full cost of labor, without using a safety net. It's Jason's insight that led me to know that poverty is affecting the 100%. Poverty is not just about those who struggle every day with the hard reality of not being able to put food on the table or worrying about a roof over people's heads. Poverty is not just those who live in the homeless shelter. Poverty is affecting all of us because the 100% know that our society is growing less. Our society is less creative. Our society is suffering because our people are suffering. So I am grateful for this opportunity to be before you and the committee and the folks streaming out there, but to say that for the sake of our democracy, we need to deal with the structural imbalance. It is wages, it's income, it's valuing our people. And from my perspective, it is a pro-life stance to say that all families should be able to live in dignity with the wages from their work. All families need to be able to say that we will resolve the structural causes of poverty because this gross income and wealth inequality is the root of all social ills. It's the root of the violence in our cities. It's the root of disparity, of hunger. We need to do it. And I think that using both the programs that work, some creativity in looking for new ways to make this work, and for seeing it as an issue for the 100%, we can create a new way forward. And I'd be happy to entertain any questions that you might have of me, or now or in the future.
I appreciate you sharing some of your perspective and your experience traveling around the country on the bus and hearing from Americans and Californians and their perspective, those both living with income inequality and those that aren't,
Right.
and their attitude. I appreciate your time and your willingness to speak to a number of our legislative leaders earlier today. One ask you the question we as policymakers always rush to. We don't want to talk about the problems. We want to get to the first idea about the solution. So you were asked, given our reality in California, our political reality, our economic reality, the reality of the levels of poverty in California, what are the 1 or 2 state policy changes you think would start us on this road that you've painted for us?
Can I have three?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You're the nun on the bus. You could have 5.
No, but I've been trained that focus is all. I think key issue. There are 3 key issues. One is for those who are working in and still living in poverty, the issue is money in their pockets to survive. We know that children do better in school if their parents are not worried every day about either keeping a roof over their heads or food on the table. So things that work are increased wages and the earned income tax credit, the child tax credit, all of these pieces that get more money into the hands of hard-working, low-income families. What a lot of people don't know is how much work it takes to be poor. And it is an incredible amount of bookkeeping and record keeping and accountability. Calculations. So getting more money in their hands for that hard work would be step 1, which I think can be done both through tax policies and wages. The second is because to have incentives that corporations can corporations or any of these businesses could have where they get a benefit for reducing the ratio between the top and the bottom. Folks, bring it back into line because until 1980, we did not have this problem. It was when it became more lucrative for having these high salaries and then getting the benefits of dividends and interest from investments that this skyrocket took off. So if we pull it back, we the people will be better for it. And we will beneficially either encourage greater wages at the bottom or greater sharing of the wealth. And then the third area is work supports. The fact is that Adriana, who is making $1,000 a month and paying $500 for childcare, $240 for transportation that she needs in order to go to work, we have to make it reasonable for people to work. And so those work supports are a great way. Childcare, early childhood education, all of the key services that make it feasible. Those are the 3 pieces. Money in the pocket, reducing income inequality, and then working on the specific costs that people face when they go to work would be key.
So you've outlined your top 3 what? So my next question is how? We had a conversation earlier about incrementalism versus all in. And yesterday's Los Angeles Times columnist, the title of the article was Given a Little to Get a Little. Can California working families and women who are experiencing such severe income inequality, can they afford incrementalism?
I believe that the 100% are required to make this change happen, and we each have a role. And what we need women with experience doing is standing up. And the convening that you're doing, this hearing, is a great opportunity for women to stand up and tell the story, because we've got to pull the reality in some direction that makes change possible. And then, this is the hard part, is that when we raise a new reality and we get society moving, then the politicians come along and navigate that very narrow line of getting change done. But unless we have people pulling on the edge very hard, change will never happen. So we can't start by accepting incrementalism. What we start with is pulling as hard as we can to make the change, and then rejoicing with whatever we can get finally at the end of the day, but not being satisfied. See, this is the thing, is one of the things about the work that we do is Walter Brueggemann, who's a theologian. It's kind of weird to talk theology here in a hearing room, but what he says is that the characteristic of a community that nurtures a prophetic imagination, that imagination that we can envision a world where poverty is not the crippling reality. He says what we need, the 5th characteristic we need is the capacity to sustain long-term tension with the dominant culture. The vision will never be fully met. But we can't, it doesn't mean we give up the vision. We just commit ourselves yet again to keep working for it. Because that is what is good for California and for our nation. So, yes, we have to pull. We have to pull as hard as we can and be as dramatic as we can for making change. And then we have to rejoice in what will inevitably be incrementalism, frustrating as it is. And then come back the next day and begin to push again.
That was so profound, I just forgot my third question. It's completely gone.
It's probably a sign. This is enough.
That's the point you should end on.
Amen.
Any other, given your experience nationally, I think it's important that we, even as the great state of California, look to our sister states across the country. What policies or strategies have you seen in your travels that you found innovative, that you think that we should spend some time looking at and considering here?
Good question. Amazingly, I shouldn't say amazingly, I was in Kansas recently, and one of the ways of storytelling of real Kansans that they have is this Poverty A to Z, and it's women telling their own story, but done in a photo walk where some of it's video and some of it's still photos, but where women tell their story. And the piece that I found powerful is that they took that to chambers of commerce and to a variety of settings that one would not expect poverty to be a part of the conversation. And we're trying to educate these strange bedfellows about what the reality is, the struggle of women in poverty in Kansas is about. And they had found it really successful for beginning to engage the conversation about what was really happening in Kansas and the income and wealth disparity in a principally rural county where it could be rural state where it could be really missed. That was innovative. In Oregon, some of the things that they're trying in Oregon with college payment policies, where you can, they've got this new program where if you're a resident of the state of Oregon, you go to a state school, that you don't start paying back until 20 years after you graduate. What a great idea. So we don't cripple young people and constrict creativity. I was recently in, where was I? It was a New England state because they were very formal about it. I think it was Massachusetts. It was Massachusetts, I think. And their effort there at creating more of a sense of neighborhood community, neighborhood policies, both for that fostered after-school programs as well. Grandparent, how'd this work? There was a community grandparent program where seniors, retired seniors, were taking responsibility for middle school kids, and the engagement that was both good for the retired folks as well as for the middle schoolers. And it created a whole web of relationships at what were otherwise latchkey kids. And that community engagement then got these foster grandparent types more concerned about the parents, more concerned about family, more engaged in the community, and really bolstered some of the smaller towns. It could be a model that would work for some neighborhoods.
And foster grandparents who tend to disproportionately be voters could also then become oriented toward the needs of schools.
Exactly. Well,
perhaps vote for school bonds.
As opposed to just me.
As opposed to, you relying on our NIMBYism tendencies when we go on the ballot.
Exactly. Because I think at the heart of all this is the fact that our hyper-individualism blames the individual. And the fact is, we're not about individuals as a society. We know that where we are best as our nation is we the people. It's the first three words of the Constitution. So I claim it's an unpatriotic lie to say we're based in individualism. It's we the people of the United States. That's where we're best.
Any closing comments?
No, except to say that I am grateful for this opportunity. I am so grateful you're taking this on. It's one of the toughest issues in our society because it's a painful issue we'd like to hide our eyes from. And so shining a light on the struggle of low-income folks is so important because it lets us know that we too need to be converted and make some changes. As a person of faith, just know that I hold this process in my care and prayer and know that we the people can make a difference. God lives in all of us, and that if we work hard together, the 100% can make this different. So thank you for this
I
opportunity.
couldn't agree with you more. Thank you so much for coming and sharing with us. Thank
Thank
you
you.
very, very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. And thank you for autographing my book. Appreciate it. Panel 2, if we can have all three panelists from the second panel join us. Dr. Rita Cameron Wedding, Ann Sanger, and Ana Matasantos. Again, in our first select committee hearing, as well as our convening a couple of years ago, we did a CalWork in my capacity as chair of Assembly Budget Subcommittee 1 in Health and Human Services. We did a CalWorks 2-day convening where we talked about poverty, the challenges facing California's poor today. A number of issues came up that haven't gone away, as Sister Simone suggests. And so one issue that came up that we didn't have the opportunity to fully vet was this notion of the intersection of race and gender and poverty. And so we're honored today to have Dr. Rita Cameron Wedding, Chair of the Women's Studies and Professor of Women's Studies and Ethnic Studies at Sacramento State University. Dr. Cameron Wedding's scholarship focuses on race, gender, and social class disparities in public youth-serving institutions, such as child welfare, education, and juvenile justice. Dr. Cameron Wedding's curriculum, Bias, Impact on Decision Makers, has broadly informed the discussion of race and social justice. Dr. Cameron Wedding served 2 terms with me as a gubernatorial appointee to the California Commission on the Status of Women. She also serves in the governing board of Global Majority, an international organization that promotes world peace through conflict resolution, education, mediation, and advocacy. Thank you so much for coming today.
Thank you so much, Senator Mitchell. It's certainly an honor and my pleasure to have this opportunity to share with you this most important conversation. And I would like to overlay my comments to Sister Simone's comments because I think that they are very relevant and very much connected. I, as you mentioned, focus on the intersectionality of race, class, and gender because I believe very strongly that gender does not create a universal experience for all women. In our society, ever since, I would say, the civil rights movement, we've been very committed to masking how race plays out in our public systems. We have adopted this notion of colorblindness, and I think, it came from Dr. King's I Have a Dream speech. So on the surface, it's a very admirable thought, but in reality, it simply masks bias in all of the various places that it exists. So when we think of bias today, it's really important for us to understand that we're not necessarily talking about those things that are blatant and incontrovertible. We're talking about biases as they show up in our public and often our youth-serving systems. And in particular, my comments want to focus and examine the way gender, the way women will experience discrimination as their lives are impacted by both racism and classism and sexism. So it's so important that we recognize that poverty, as Sister Simone pointed out, is a very critical, major concern. In the United States, in general, we don't like to talk much about class, and we also like to assume that when people fall to the bottom of the social hierarchy, it's because of something that they didn't do well, that it's something that it's because of their bad behavior. But the reality is that we have structural and systemic inequality in the United States. In the image, I put an image on the board, and I don't know, Senator Mitchell, if you can see it. That's an image. I I have been showing this image for over 5 years. And it's an image, as you can see, and it's an image that I show to judges. I train judges for the National Council of Juvenile Family Court judges all over the country. And I like to show that image because it is a way to get us to think about our decision making. When you look at that image, hopefully you can see that there are 3 adult individuals who are police officers. This is an educational environment. This is a 5-year-old baby girl. And in a child welfare context, a 5-year-old baby girl has to be protected, not arrested. In this image, we see a child who is actually being arrested. She is being handcuffed and needless to say, the question that arises is what could a 5-year-old child possibly do to warrant an arrest? So this, I wanted to show this image, and I wanted to have it there and available just to remind us of the consequences of our decision making as it impacts our youth.
I think there's a similar image that I've been exposed to on the cover of a publication by the Children's Defense Fund, where it's a young man who is so small, he's standing on 2 boxes
Right,
to
absolutely.
be
I have
tall
seen
enough
that.
to be fingerprinted.
To be fingerprinted,
by law
absolutely.
enforcement. And it's such a profound visual image that he's so small in relation to the adult law enforcement
That's right.
individuals and the process, the fact that he's being fingerprinted and can't even reach the
Can't
table.
even reach it, absolutely.
It's a powerful image.
So one of the issues, the questions that comes to mind is how did we get here? And we get here through the way that we apply policies differentially and the way that we use common everyday behavior to support our decision making. So I want to talk about 2 of those things. According to Judge Irene Sullivan, America locks up more young people, approximately 1 million teenagers annually, than any other nation in the world. Girls represent the fastest growing percentage of our juvenile justice system, and a vastly disproportionate percentage of juvenile offenders are African American. So here we see the intersection of gender and race. It's the interesting thing about this is that the assumption is often that these kids are being arrested. So you look at this child, and in one state that where I showed this, I asked the audience, so what do you imagine must be the cause for this child's arrest? And Mr. Fox, I don't know him, but he was a member of the audience. Mr. Fox said, it looks like a child misbehaving. This is my response to that. Whatever your perception is of people on the basis of their race, class, and gender is going to inform your decision making. So if you have been influenced by the stereotypes, which we all have, about people of color, and many people, judges included, will say, I don't notice race, I just read the court reports. The reality is that race and racism and our decision making therein is ubiquitous. It's all over the place, and it's absolutely I would say virtually impossible for us to avoid. But the point is, if you see, even unconsciously, one of the focuses that I have is looking at implicit bias, which basically means that we are unconscious. Most of us on a conscious level can feel very strongly. We could take a lie detector test and pass the fact that we are not biased on a conscious level. But I don't think any of us can claim that we don't have any unconscious biases. Agreed. And my point is that what drives this outcome of locking up our nation's youth and our children, and in particular our girls, is our unconscious and implicit biases. So what we see here is that instead of us approaching these children from a standpoint of kids will be kids behavior, certain individuals, based on their race and based on their gender configuration, will be treated as criminals, such as in the image here. What the data says about this is very interesting. When it comes to race, the data says that black students are suspended and expelled at a rate 3 times greater than whites. When it comes to gender, the data says that black girls are suspended at higher rates, 12% more than girls of any race and ethnicity, and boys of many groups. So black girls have a higher rate of suspension and expulsion than any other group of girls and many groups of boys as well. And I want to say this this last piece, which is the growing concern is that we are arresting preschool children
And expelling them from preschool.
and expelling them from preschool. Children as young as 4 and 5 are put on this school to prison trajectory, as black children represent 18% of preschool enrollment, yet 48% of preschool children receiving more than one out-of-school suspension. Now, the consequences of this are fairly obvious. The consequences of this are that when a child is suspended, receives one suspension, it increases the likelihood that they will not graduate from high school by 50%. So now we start to see the relationship between schools and juvenile justice. When kids are, and they are being suspended from school not for violence necessarily. What the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention says is that only 3% of school suspensions and expulsions are due to violence. So many people, when they look at this high rate of suspensions, particularly as they apply to people of color, and 43% of school suspensions are for willful defiance, which is being outlawed in many jurisdictions, even in California.
Yes.
Willful defiance, things like rolling your eyes, talking back, profanity. Exactly. Kids are losing their valuable education for this, and once they're out of school, it increases the likelihood that they're going to drop out, get involved in the criminal justice system. One experience in the criminal justice system, especially in juvenile hall, will increase the likelihood that they will end up in adult correctional facility. So we see this cycle of events that are happening, and that are absolutely avoidable. My question is, how on earth, well, you know, I want to ask, how on earth could somebody look at that 5-year-old baby girl and see a criminal? If your stereotypes move you in that direction, that's what you're going to see, and that's what your decision making is going to result in. The biggest issue here, though, is that if you see a child who is having a tantrum and you think of her as being somebody who has to be arrested, then we have an even greater problem as we look at the consequences. The consequences in one case, not this particular case, but another case of a 6-year-old girl who was arrested, and this is how the second pattern of behavior in terms of modern racism shows up. The first is the disparities in how we apply and enforce policies and procedures in public youth serving systems. The second one is how we use language in youth serving systems that will promote bias. And the chief of police who dealt with this particular case, this is how his language resulted in her behavior. He described the tantrum of the 5-year-old girl this way. He says, when there is an outburst of violence, just using the word in reference to a 5-year-old child who's having a tantrum, I would never look at my 5-year-old child or grandchild who's having a tantrum and say, you're violent. I mean, just using that word means that you're taking that child down a different trajectory than she needs to be taken. Moreover, in the other case, in many of the other cases involved, these children are charged, they're booked into jail, and they're charged. In one case, in particular, the 6-year-old kindergarten child was charged with a felony and 2 misdemeanors. Now, this is the point. It's like, so when we talk about women's justice and equality, if we start losing our children and children of color, the intersection between race and gender, if we start losing the children as early as 5 and 6 years old, there's no hope for them by the time they get to high school, because they've already racked up felony convictions. They're racking up, Judge Irene Sullivan talks about the fact that these children are racking up felony convictions when they're just little kids. And I really couldn't believe it. And then when she actually told me this on the phone, and then she wrote a book, and I finally was able to quote directly from her book, and I was like, I guess it's really happening. And of course, judges support this to be the case all along. So Suspensions contribute to the dropout rate in school failure, and of course, this is leading more and more of our kids, including our girls, into the criminal justice system.
And deeper into poverty.
And deeper into poverty because they can't, deeper into poverty for a couple of reasons. One reason is that even if you are a mother and you have children who are involved in the criminal justice system, a lot of your resources are going to go into paying for fines and taking time off work and doing whatever you need to do to protect your child. Some mothers talk about the fact that I can't pay rent because I have a child who is involved in the criminal justice system, and sometimes the mothers will say, just take them because I have other kids to take care of. So there's a hopelessness that shows up. But judges say that, again, that the bias does not necessarily reflect up in a blatant and incontrovertible way. It's a bias in how we utilize language in court reports. So, for example, in court reports, we often see language when the reference, and it's not a direct reference to race, but it's indirect. And judges have said that when they're looking and reading affidavits that have to do with the drug use of the mothers. When they're talking about white mothers, the affidavit often reads, no drug use. When the reference is to black mothers, the affidavit often reads, mother alleges no drug use. And so one of the things that we have to do, and I'm going to get to my conclusion now, and I'm going to make recommendations about having a racial impact statement as an intervention tool that makes race explicit. Color blindness is not doing us a favor anymore. All it's doing is allowing us to mask and ignore the biases that are showing up and allow the stereotypes to inform our decision making. There are several other states who have used racial impact statements through the legislative process to ensure that social services programs are equitable, and I think it's also a program or a practice that California could employ. What Chief Justice Blackmun says, we have come full circle. In other words, we no longer have to pretend that we are colorblind when we are not. Racial discrimination cannot be effectively reckoned with without policies that directly confront racism and its effects. In order to get beyond racism, we must first take account of race. So the intersections between race and gender are inexplicable. In order for us to fully achieve women's equality, we have to look at race, and we have to examine every decision point that has the potential to influence their success or failure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. As you know, we started the day with convening a room filled with advocates, representatives from the administration, staff here in the building, women who are beneficiaries of many of the public benefit programs we were talking about. And we had breakout groups, and the race and gender bias group was the most vocal. And what it occurred to me is we often have policy conversations in silos. And so if we talk about poverty alleviation, we want to talk about the public benefit programs. When we talk about income inequality, then we'll broaden it out a bit and talk about the working poor. And that's when we talk about earned income tax credit and raising the minimum wage. But we have to think much more systemically when we factor in race and gender to recognize all the other areas of influence. I'm reminded members of the Women's Caucus just last night had the opportunity to break bread with our state's Attorney General, Kamala Harris, who talked about her focus on elementary school absenteeism and the high rate of absenteeism and the consequences. So if you've got an elementary school age child who has missed 50 some odd days of a 180-day school year, what is that indicative of? What's happening at home, and how that sets them up for failure. Middle school, in terms of the information they don't take into that experience, the suspensions, and this downward spiral. This morning, sitting on Senate Public Safety Committee, there was a young woman who came to testify who gave the perfect example of one instance, probably willful defiance. Girls in high school, in the ancient prehistoric times when I was in high school, girls fought. That's nothing new. And how that suspension propelled her on this track. And this new concept, new to me, of truancy tickets.
Oh, yes.
We've heard about truancy tickets in the
Right.
Select Committee on Men and Boys of Color, and how the truancy tickets that she couldn't afford to pay
Right.
led to a certain level when she also didn't have the money to have her juvenile record sealed,
Right.
that when she then graduated and attempted to get gainful employment, those issues came back to haunt her in terms of her ability to apply for college scholarships, job applications that ask if you've ever had a conviction, what she will face in the future if we don't fix this, ability to qualify
right.
for home loans, it's on and on. So when we talk about income inequality or inequality for women, these are critical factors that if we don't address in this broader context
Right.
of gender inequality and income inequality, really will continue to prevent us from getting to a place of income safety.
Right. Absolutely.
Any other comments or closing remarks?
No, I just wanted to share that exactly what you just said, the importance of integrating these conversations.
Right.
And seeing that the way that we manage to our public systems are contributing to the poverty of our communities.
And as Sister Simone said, sometimes these issues feel so overwhelming.
Yes.
And I know I've often struggled with why aren't we making much more meaningful progress in this legislative body, because or nationally. And I think I've concluded that it's just so overwhelming that it's easier for policymakers, particularly, quite frankly, in term-limited environments, to tackle something that we feel we can wrap our arms around and solve, if you
Right.
will. But given how complex this issue is, how layered it is, race, gender,
That's right.
it really is complicated. But having this opportunity, I think, to have the select committee, have the convenings to really begin to identify priorities is important. You mentioned that you had recommendations. Any specific state policy?
The racial impact statements
Got it.
are being used. We used one in Shelby County, which is Memphis, Tennessee, working with their juvenile court so that we could help decision makers think about the influence of race and gender in their decision making.
On all policy issues?
On policy issue, in that case, it was pertaining to the juvenile court. So, but on a statewide level, there are at least 3 states that I'm aware of who are using it on all of their policy issues. And let me see what those states are. I know it's Oregon, Connecticut, and Iowa have started using racial impact statements, which are modeled after
Iowa.
the environmental impact statements. And the whole idea is to invert race so that we can make it explicit. You know, as Judge Harry Blackman said, the time has come. It's like maybe colorblindness was good for a moment. I think obviously the intention of Dr. King is very virtuous and ideal. But the reality is, if we're going to end poverty, we have to identify where poverty is showing up, and we have to be able to look at and manage all of our decision points. And colorblindness simply masks and suppresses accountability. So all individuals within public systems have to be accountable for their decision making. This is how I make myself accountable, is that I examine the decisions that I make. And if we would institute that as a responsibility of state agencies, I think it could make a difference. I think we could reduce the number of girls who are being arrested for status offenses and who are staying in the system longer than even boys stay, and who have even a more harsher impact because they are women and they are the ones who are going to raise the children and manage to the families in many cases. So having a tool or an intervention tool or strategy to help our state, the state of California, I think the 9th largest economy in the world.
8th
8th? Oh, we're doing better. Oh, great.
today.
Oh, today? Awesome. I think would be a good approach.
And as you talked about our unconscious and implicit bias, I think it's a
Absolutely.
way to consciously
That's
keep
right.
that in check
And
as
so
we
those
develop policy.
and those things happen simultaneously. So people need to recognize their unconscious biases. They need to recognize the extent to which stereotypes are informing those biases, and that color blindness is not doing us a favor.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your testimony today. Next, I'd like to introduce Ann Sanger, who's a policy advisor to Congresswoman Matsui. Our effort today, and really kind of part of the vision around this Select Committee on Women and Inequality, is directly related to the national campaign, When Women Succeed, America Succeeds, the Women's Economic Agenda spearheaded by leader Nancy Pelosi. Their goal is to enable women to achieve greater economic security, raise wages for women and their families, and allow working parents to support and care for their families. I've been able to participate in 2 of the national forums to discuss this effort. And again, was moved by the women in attendance who told their personal stories about what happens to you when you lack income security in your families. Thank you very much, Ann, for being here to talk to us today about the initiative and make sure that this Select Committee, the Women's Caucus has had the conversation, recognizing how powerful it could and should be if legislators, particularly women in legislative bodies, are kind of in sync with this national effort and the greater impact we all could collectively have on women and income security.
Thank you so much, and I agree. The more voices, the better. Thank you so much for including me today. It is an absolute treat to be able to hear Sister Simone, Dr. Wedding, and I haven't heard Anna yet, but it really helps, I think, everyone get even more energized to move this agenda forward.
I agree.
So, thank you, Chair Mitchell, for that kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here today on behalf of Congresswoman Matsui and Leader Pelosi. My name is Ann Sanger. I serve as Congresswoman Matsui's policy advisor here in the Sacramento region. As Vice Chair of the Women's Caucus in Congress, the Congresswoman is working with her colleagues to protect women's health, fight cuts to Social Security and Medicare, support programs like WIC and Head Start, and advocate for economic equality for women. And last year, Congresswoman Matsui joined with Leader Pelosi in introducing the Women's Economic Agenda, appropriately named When Women Succeed, America Succeeds, an economic agenda for women and families. The agenda stands on 3 pillars. First, fair and equal pay. Second, paid leave. And third, child care. Women account for almost 2/3 of the minimum wage workers in this country, and many do not have access to paid leave. This creates the impossible decision of choosing between a paycheck for the day or staying home with a sick child. And the challenge of finding affordable, reliable child care can be daunting. In most parts of the country, the cost of daycare is higher than a public college tuition. The sticker shock of daycare and the long waiting list for the centers that are highly recommended is making child care a financial hardship for many working moms. These are challenges that women all over the country face every day. The When Women Succeed agenda offers real solutions that we can act upon to address pay, paid leave, and child care. It includes paycheck fairness legislation, an increase in the national minimum wage, and support for women and small business owners. The agenda calls for Congress to enact paid family and medical leave and paid sick leave legislation. And the Women's Economic Agenda supports President Obama's vision for universal preschool. These are just some of the steps we can take to ensure women are treated fairly and are able to take full advantage of the opportunities they have earned. Last June marked the 50th anniversary of the Equal Pay Act. In 1963, when the Equal Pay Act was passed, women made 59 cents on the dollar that men made. 50 years later, women are still paid significantly less than men for the same work. Today, women earn 77 cents for every dollar men make. Equal pay should not only be viewed as an issue of fairness, it's an economic issue. The yearly gap of $8,220 that women face could have been put to use paying off student loans, paying for the down payment of a new home, or investing in a retirement account. President Obama's first bill signed into law in January 2009 was the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act, which overturned the 180-day statute of limitations for women to contest pay discrimination. It was an important down payment in ending the pay gap and keeping the courthouse doors open. Paycheck fairness puts the money that women have rightfully earned into their pockets where it belongs. Because of this, Congresswoman Matsui is a co-sponsor of the Paycheck Fairness Act, H.R. 377. The Paycheck Fairness Act will close the loopholes that allow pay discrimination to continue in the first place and provide employees the rights they need to challenge and eliminate pay discrimination in the workplace. The bill would require employers to show pay disparity is truly related to job performance and not gender. It prohibits employer retaliation for sharing salary information with coworkers. Under current law, employers can sue and punish employees for sharing such information. In addition, it strengthens remedies for pay discrimination by increasing compensation women can seek, allowing them not only to seek back pay, but also punitive damages for pay discrimination. Finally, the bill empowers women in the workplace through a grant program to strengthen salary negotiation and other workplace skills, requires the Department of Labor to enhance outreach and training efforts to eliminate pay disparity. Unfortunately, while this legislation has over 200 co-sponsors in the House, House Republicans refuse to bring the issue to the floor for a vote. And while we all want equal pay, the Congresswoman is also working with her colleagues to increase the federal minimum wage. The current federal minimum wage is $7.25. Last year, Congressman Miller and Senator Tom Harkin introduced the Fair Minimum Wage Act. This bill would increase the minimum wage in 3 steps over 3 years, from $7.25 per hour to $10.10 per hour. It would then index future annual increases to inflation thereafter. Even though a strong majority of Americans support raising the minimum wage, this Congress has refused to give it a vote. We have come a long way, but we still have a lot of work to do. And again, the Women Succeed agenda focuses on fair pay, paid leave, and childcare. We look forward to working with you to further women's issues because we know when women succeed, America succeeds. And I would just add, aside from some of the federal actions that Congress is taking, we have some wonderfully strong-willed women in Congress, from Leader Pelosi to Congressman Matsui to Louise Slaughter to Reza DeLauro. And they took that bus trip that I think we talked about just quickly to really get the face of this agenda on the road.
Can you talk to us a little bit about the bus trip, please?
And about the bus trip. So they started in Seneca Falls and took a number of members of Congress through these small towns to really get the word out, put a face on this agenda that we have a lot of work to do. This is an issue that is very, very much alive, unfortunately, in so many communities. And they came down through Massachusetts and through Pennsylvania, and they ended up in Ohio at the end of the trip to make sure that, you know, there's got to be a public component to what we do. We talk about it and study it and dig into the details of it. And it needs to have sort of a day-to-day discussion of people who can help with the grassroots. And I think Sister Simone pointed out, you know, you don't ask for what you need, you ask for what you want, and then you end up maybe with what you need at the end of the day. And I think that's what the members are trying to do, is to make people a little uncomfortable and hopefully have this discussion be part of what changes the federal leadership. We have some very good people in Washington, but it is a struggle to get through some of the iron walls that have been put up by others in the leadership. So one of the ways to do that is to get the public engaged. So that was what they were doing today.
So between the Congresswoman on the bus and the nuns on the bus, I think there's a theme there. To get a bus and put my legislative colleagues and the governor on it.
Right.
What role can women legislators, members of this select committee, also play in true partnership with Leader Pelosi and this vision around when women succeed, America succeeds, and when women in California succeeds, the California economy succeeds? We're clear, just based on the income disparity. You know, we are consumers. For the vast majority of us who are parents, any additional income we receive then bounces our community 2 or 3 times between the purchase of diapers, as we've talked about in Assemblywoman Gonzalez's bill. We spend to provide for our families. So what way can we partner with this national movement in a significant way, meaningful way?
Right. So, I think the two pieces of legislation that I mentioned, the Paycheck Fairness and the Minimum Wage Bill, are bills that have an enormous amount of support. And frankly, polling shows that the country supports an increase in the minimum wage. And that's just not translating district to district back in Washington. And I think, supporting this agenda in all the communities that the members of the state legislature live in and making it part of the policy agenda. The top, above the fold stories in the newspaper every day are the ones that tend to get the most attention, and it's got to be something that we can bring district by district and have it become the reason maybe we're not recovering economically as a country so quickly as we thought we might, especially in California.
Women are faring
and
worse.
Women are even further behind in that curve. And a lot of the tension that I think everywhere in the country people feel politically, that the extremes are getting more extreme because of the inequality in the incomes. When there's more fairness, you don't get this division of the politics as much. So it really, if it could just be alive in each of, I think, the state legislators' district, because it's there, that chart that you've got. And I love that photo example of bringing it to the chambers of commerce, because they understand that there is a problem, but they don't necessarily have it as a priority to solve the problem or to be part of that solving of the problem. So, but they know that it's not good for business. So, to put a face on it, I think would be wonderful in all of these districts. So
I agree.
appreciate that.
And I just was, as you talk about the top of the fold, was struck just based on the 2 town halls I participated in, the number of women in the room, the political power at the dais, that, women, I think, share power better than some of our colleagues. And to see a town hall with multiple women of Congress on message, on a common message, and if we could multiply that by the number of women, frankly, serving in state legislatures across the country, I think it really would be powerful. That if we could all identify and prioritize a women's economic agenda, much like the work of the Select Committee, we could make significant progress. Thank you. Thank the Congresswoman for her work, and I appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Last but not least, Ms. Montesantos, Ana Montesantos, was previously the director of the State Department of Finance under 2 administrations, both Governor Schwarzenegger and Governor Brown. Clearly, she was director during a period of intense challenge and, in some opinions, controversy in our state. And thought it was very important, now that she's no longer an employee of state government and out doing policy consulting, to hear your perspective, either in the new work you're doing or your perspective on how we go forward in this ongoing conversation about poverty alleviation. Welcome, Ms. Montesantos.
Thank you very much for having me, Senator. It's a pleasure to be here. It's actually quite humbling an experience, and I feel like after Sister Simone and the panelists, there's nothing left to say. I keep thinking about the Sweet Honey in the Rock song was where I first heard it. We are the ones we've been waiting for. In terms of movement to action. In terms of thinking about, before leaving finance, the state demographer Bill Schooling put together some information that really kind of caught me in terms of thinking about some of the statistics and the challenges that we face as we think about our, how California is changing and the growth of the Latino population, particularly Latinos becoming the single largest group in our state. And as we think about the rates, but the striking thing was looking at the rate at which Latinos are living in poverty growing faster for every overall age group, if I'm remembering correctly, than overall Latino population growth. And thinking about our trends, thinking about income inequality, there's a lot of discussion about how much of California's personal income taxes come from particular sectors of the economy. Well, part of that is because of the progressive tax structure, but part of that is because of what's happening with income and the extent to which the income of the top 1% or the top tenth of 1% has increased over time since we look at the trends from, say, the 70s to today. And it's, part of, it's because I've been reading more sections of the newspaper of late. Maybe it's because it's changing. It seems that the positive elements of how big the numbers are getting and how prevalent poverty and income inequality and some of these challenges are becoming in our society is that I think it's much more in the world. It's much more in the consciousness. There's a lot more discussion about these challenges and more discussion about how, as Sister Simone spoke, it's not about an us and them issue. It's about how it affects everyone, how it affects democracy, how it affects society, how it affects everybody's opportunity. And I think in that heightened consciousness and that increased discussion, there's also the opportunity for potential policy change, and positive things have happened. Some of them happened relatively quickly, and other things took decades to occur. You think about things like healthcare reform, and it now is happening all very quickly, but it clearly was decades of discussion before getting to this point, and decades of work. Then in other areas like the local control funding formula and the changes in our education financing system to allocate a greater amount of resources to those students with the greatest needs, in some ways, that's a change that seems like happened relatively more quickly when compared to, say, 50 years for healthcare, if not longer. So it seems there's significant changes in this last budget, some of which were talked about for a long period of time, of which were quicker. For example, the policy change to deal with the prohibition for women to be able to receive, particularly women, but be able to receive public assistance if there's been a prior conviction for a drug offense. That's a substantial policy change that, interestingly, comes associated with opportunities that one does not always see coming. As in thinking about this hearing, I was talking with a colleague earlier today who said, well, part of what I try to do as an advocate is try to be very close to the window. Because it's never clear when the window is going to, window is going to open, but frequently the opportunity will be really small, will be really short, and it won't be open for very long. So it's about seizing that opportunity. So as I think about
Interesting concept. When the window's open.
when many of the comments that Sister Simone made a lot of sense to me and rang true. And part of how I think about them is, I think about being prepared, being flexible but grounded, and being ready to move fast when that opportunity presents itself. In terms of being prepared, it seems sometimes we spend a lot more time in figuring out what might be a particular solution than in being clear about what it is that one is trying to accomplish and why. I think the latter sometimes is more important because it provides the opportunity to be able to see an opportunity that presents itself and being able to move when that opportunity emerges. It may be that it's not like the program used to be, but it may be that, as Sister Simone says, there are a variety of different ways of being able to get resources to low-income communities, and part of that is through a wage increase, part of that is through a traditional income redistribution program, part of that is through an earned income tax credit. There are multiple ways of making a meaningful difference. And not all the opportunities present themselves at once. And if there is clarity about what the goal is, then whenever the appropriate opportunity presents itself, then there's an opportunity to be able to move. I think about allies taking different shapes, and sometimes the ally is a supporter, but sometimes the ally is the one who is not invested in completely, killing a particular idea. And they play different roles, but they're important in getting to resolution and getting policy change to occur. From what I've observed, being an observer in this world for a bit, I think about not trying to marginalize people or assume where it is that people are coming from, because in doing so, sometimes we marginalize ourselves and we leave ourselves with a party of one. It may be that sometimes people don't come to the same to support a policy idea for the same reason than we would, but sometimes their being there is what gets it done. And I think it's important to not assume where people are coming from, and then to listen and try to figure out where those opportunities might be, to come together to get things changed. And I think some of the examples of things that have happened in the recent past are partly, say the law enforcement community and the social services advocates coming together and saying, hey, this kind of policy change would actually be helpful to both communities for what
On
we're
the
trying
SNAP
to do.
policy change
Yes,
for drug felons.
exactly. In terms of other, sometimes we think a lot about, as you mentioned, that poverty sometimes ends up in this bucket of it's about traditional income redistribution, it's about this program, it's about this tax policy, and and it's about who we tax and how, and where are we spending those dollars, and that is income redistribution and public programs are definitely a very important element of the safety net, and a definitely important element of addressing many of these challenges, but not the only approach. And I think it's important to think about the range of policy choices and policy tools that are available to effect positive change, and thinking about choices not only in what the active choice is, but also what the passive choice is, in terms of not raising the question, as Dr. Cameron Wedding was talking about, that it's, I think, you were talking about implicit bias, and to me it's also implicit bias. Similarly, there's a passive choice in policy making where we don't think about what is the effect of this particular choice on something else. Choosing to spend in one area means choosing not to spend in a different area. Opportunities like minimum, frequently there's a focus on budget and allocation of resources, but there's also allocation of resources through policymaking. And I think about how much of my opportunities in life all had to do with the fact that people had the opportunity to be able to go on paid maternity leave. And then there were a shortage of people around and more opportunities for me to do work.
So way of looking at it.
So, well, it's just thinking about the fact that there's a range of policy options. So I'll basically, close with that. Thank you again for the opportunity, and hope that I have had something to share that may be thought-provoking. But I'm encouraged by the discussion, and even more encouraged by the courage of people like you willing to take these issues on.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate your last point, because as I grow and develop, Senator Liu, in my role as a policymaker, am appreciating the need for building a big tent for all folks, allies, people that I identify instantly as allies, and perhaps those I don't, to begin to have a common conversation around this critical issue. So that point was very helpful. Let me stop and introduce State Senator Carol Liu.
I apologize for the time.
Oh, everyone fully appreciates that this is
Right.
crazy season. We were trying to make sure that we had this conversation after the passage of the most recent budget, but early enough while the experience was fresh enough for everyone
Right.
to talk about, gains, losses, what we learned, and what we'd like to see similar or different next go round. So timing is never ideal. We really appreciate you coming to share some time. I feel very fortunate and selfish that I had the opportunity to hear all of the amazing panelists. It was broadcast on the web, so we'll make sure that you have the opportunity to see that. Any comments or remarks you'd like to make?
I would thank you very much for having this select committee. I think this issue is really timely and very important. I mean, we have just struggled through child care, early learning issues. We continue to take a look at issues affecting working women, and how we can be more supportive of our children and women. And it's a struggle. It
Every day.
really, every day it's a struggle. And you just gave me this female head of household living in poverty. We've been talking in my district, about poverty. We've had Sister Diane on Nuns on the Bus. She followed me around, was on my bus 3 years ago, I think when we looked about food security or insecurity, and we did a statewide tour, and it's amazing, and that was through the economic downturn. It affects all of us, but more importantly, it really affects those that really find themselves way off the track. And it's in a country this wealthy, we should be ashamed of ourselves. And so I applaud all of us who are really concerned about this issue, that you're focusing on it, and we need to shed a little light and do better.
Well, everyone should know what an innovator you are, because we've had the opportunity for everyone to kind of give their ideal top 3 issues. If we had the opportunity, what should we do? And the overwhelming consensus is supported a state earned income tax credit.
Yes,
Does that
that's
sound
right.
familiar to you?
Yes, it does. It didn't get it past appropriations, but that's what it is.
Senator Lou carried the bill.
All right, we'll do it again.
Excellent, excellent, excellent. So, please know that we'll share kind of the outcome of today's convening earlier, and make sure that you get a list of all those who've talked about the issue, so they can be supporters of the bill that you'll hopefully introduce again.
Correct.
That you'll hopefully allow me to sign on as a co-author and have the full support of the Select Committee. Thank you.
Good.
Any closing final comments from any of the panelists? We welcome them before I open it up to public comment.
If I may, I forgot to say one thing about
Please.
incrementalism.
Yes. Oh.
And I think it's kind of similar actually to what Sister Simone was saying. I tend to think about, instead of thinking about incrementalism as small steps, I think of incrementalism as steps, and some of them can be large and some of them can be small, and they're the and I think of incrementalism rooted in a longer term vision as kind of a path for getting things done. So anyway, that was my only thought that I forgot, because you asked a question about incrementalism earlier.
You particularly, and others in this room, understand that the incrementalism versus all-in question was directed at myself. So thank you for sharing your perspective. And again, like I said, I too am learning, and my notion is casting a larger tent. I appreciate all of you, and if Maria Shriver can discover that women are living paycheck to paycheck, and have a report about it, and blog about it, and be on national TV about it, perhaps we should cast our broader tent to bring all of our allies to the table to talk about our aha moments and what we're going to do to make a difference.
Actually, last Friday, I had a conference in my a convening of women at a lunch. Women mean business. And one of the speaker was Dixie Noonan, who comes from the Shriver Report. And it was, this is not only a ladies' lunch, but, we used to do this, we honor women in business. But this time we called it Women Mean Business. And it was very energizing to have a room full of close to 400 women getting just a little radical. So, it's maybe collectively together, we could sound the alarm, because women know how difficult it is. And especially our single women with kids. And we talk about childcare and all this early learning stuff. So, it is a start, a poke.
It is.
But we've been poking for a long time. So, maybe we need to do something more dramatic.
Thank you very much to the panelists. Appreciate it. And as they leave the table, Sister Simone talked earlier about a story of meeting with a male business owner in San Diego who was a business owner and wealthy, but acknowledged the fact that he paid a living wage because he understood that was better for his business in terms of maintaining the workforce, and growing his business. And so Sister Simone's argument was that that poverty alleviation and closing the gap of income inequality was a 100% priority, that everybody has a vested interest. And so I'm sure the women who mean business owners, could appreciate that as well.
That's right.
With that, we'll open it up to brief public comment. If there are those who would like to comment on anything they heard today. I see one person making the move, and I see a second person. And with that, after these two, we'll close public comment. Please identify yourself, your name and your organization if you're representing one.
Yes. Natasha Broadway, with a founder of Witnesses to Hunger for Northern California. Okay. Last time I came, I was also introduced under that title, but I didn't talk about what Witnesses to Hunger was. So
When you came and testified at our first select committee.
yes,
hearing.
yes, when I came to testify at the first select committee. Sister Campbell was just talking about how she was traveling and she saw the still images and ways to speak to legislators and policymakers about what are the faces of poverty, and that's exactly what we're trying to do with Witnesses to Hunger. It is a group that is actually led by people who are experiencing hunger, so all the decisions and everything that we're going to do is going to be from their viewpoint, from my viewpoint, as well as other people who are experiencing this same thing. So I wanted to mention that that is something that will be happening in Northern California.
Excellent.
Also, I have a quick testimony about something that happened recently. From the last time I came, my viewpoint was a little different because I had the unique opportunity, because of this select committee, to talk about being on CalWorks and how it feels and what we're experiencing. And when I went to go recertify, because it happened to be time for recertification, I went to go recertify. I had a different perspective. I started thinking of it differently. Like, if I tell the worker how I feel, like I did with you guys when I came last time, they're either going to stick their nose up at me like I already expected them to do, and then I'm going to be able to write about it and tell Senator Holly Mitchell on them. And so, so that was my mindset. So I said, there's not going to be any consequences by me saying this. I'm not worried about what they're going to think. And when I went to talk to them, I started telling about exactly what I'm doing, how I'm running around with so many different networks and volunteering to speak and volunteering to be an advocate. And but it's not, that's why my income is not changing, because I can't go back to the minimum wage jobs like they would like for me to do, because that's not my passion and it's just another cycle. So I started telling them that, and he asked me, he said, so what do you want to do? And I was like, wow, okay. So I told him what I would like to do, and he extended his networks to me. So just that small difference in just perception, just the way I felt about it, not feeling like, basically the way they're already feeling about me, like she's just coming here just to do this, and and they're so busy, and he's just typing away on his computer. But I use that time that he's just sitting there just typing away, trying to quickly get through the meeting, to just sit there and talk to him. And just that small difference really changed the course of my case. So now my worker is specifically invested in me, trying to do what he can do to make the difference. Obviously, he said he can't do much because he's very busy. Will be able to talk to me in about 2-3 weeks, but he did give me a number to call and a follow-up. And I just wanted to say that if we allow more opportunities for women specifically, because of how it works, to be able to feel empowered, to be able to be like, I'm not going to just take whatever you give me, but I'm going to make the difference. I'm going to cause you to listen to me, and really give them the words, because we never came into CalWorks with the tools to know how to deal with our caseworkers. We just came in broken majority of the time because we're experiencing poverty. We're afraid. We're living life on survival mode. So you don't walk in naturally feeling empowered. And I feel like even what we're talking about the advisory board, or just putting funding towards something that is going to create that empowerment for people to be able to either help others who are on CalWorks, or something that's going to help them, just become more empowered. So one of the opportunities that he sent in my direction was to become an advocate for welfare rights. It was a network he already had, and he says, I would like for you to pursue that. Tell them that you want income, because immediately the conversation went to CWEX. Okay, would you like to volunteer with us? No. don't need any more volunteer opportunities. I'm already volunteering enough. And they gave me an opportunity to give a proposal. So I will be giving a proposal. However, they're also looking for funding because they're a nonprofit. So I don't know how Hillzone did it. I don't know how other obesity epidemic kind of movements did it. How did they get the funding, the grants, people really backing them? But if we can get more funding towards things like Witnesses to Hunger and the welfare rights organization that would love to hire me, if we can get more funding to people like that who are really trying to make that difference, then we will cause a cycle of empowering, and just that small thing can help people get lifted out of poverty.
Right.
So I just want to share that.
Thank you so much for because
wonderful.
we were both here last time she came and
Yes,
testified.
right.
Thank you for sharing that and walking us through kind of your full circle aha moment and your self-empowerment. And I'm sure by the third hearing you're gonna come back with another story. I'll be waiting for it. Thank you
Right.
very
Glory
much.
to God.
Next witness. Next witness, please.
Thank you, Senator. Jessica Bartholow with the Western Center on Law and Poverty. I want to thank Natasha for her testimony, but most importantly, thank you to you and to you, Senator, and to the participants of today, because one of the hardest things I find being somebody who grew up poor and now spends most of my days advocating against poverty is to hope. It takes so much bravery to hope, and it sounds like, and to believe that things can be better, right? How much bravery it took for you to talk to your worker and expose what was going on to you. How much bravery it takes to stand up in a field of your colleagues and say, this is important, and it didn't get heard, and it didn't get taken care of. This is hard. It's also really hard, speaking about one of the successes we had in the budget, the repeal of the lifetime ban for people with prior drug felony convictions. People have been standing near a window for 15 years. There hasn't been a single year in which Western Center hasn't been in support of a bill. I know I've been at the table for a lot of those years as an anti-hunger advocate. The crowd got bigger and bigger, and I think that helped. But we've been saying the same thing for 15 years, that the ban increases recidivism, it increases crime in our communities, it increases hunger and indignity and prison size. It's just that finally folks listened.
Sometimes the stars align.
Yeah. So I just wanted to say thank you for bringing us all together and giving us a day to think and dream and hope and to reflect on words like our national leaders, Sister Simone has to say, which is we, the 100%, do know that this is the right thing to do. It's not okay that people live with the kind of indignity that low-income Californians and Americans live with every single day, that Natasha and her family and her babies are experiencing every single day. And I guess I would just like to say that I believe that it can be better, and am so encouraged and honored to be working with everybody in tomorrow and the next day and the next 15 years to make sure that it is. Thank you.
What a perfect closing, I believe, for the second Select Committee on Women and Inequality. I appreciate the diversity of the perspectives shared today. As you know, I think that we're approaching this really as a continuum. Our first Select Committee, we heard exclusively from consumers, beneficiaries of various programs. Today's hearing, we heard from some of the thought leaders, national experts, local movers and shakers around this issue. And so again, we'll continue to approach this work as a continuum. One hearing won't reflect all of the perspectives, but we'll have collective learning throughout the course of the life of the Select Committee. What a great closing. I thank you, Ms. Bartholow, and thank you very much for attending today's hearing, and we stand adjourned.
This is the California State Senate.
Esta es el Senado Estatal de California.
This is the California State Senate.
This is